Great. I'd like to call the Plan Commission to order at 6:30 p.m. Your time, talent, and patience is appreciated in advance. We have, let's see, all members are present with the exception of Commissioner Wickland, who is probably on his way. We are anticipating his arrival or his attendance. The second item on our agenda is approval of the October 25th, 2022 meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Pollock, seconded by Commissioner Flynn Post. Any discussion?
Just a couple of changes. On page 1, item number 3, the second paragraph, there's a line that talks about the existing contest of the building.
Oh, gotcha.
And then on page 2, where there's the second full paragraph, there's a breakdown about the new proposed zoning districts. And I'm just wondering, and I'll take this up later when we discuss it, if there is a CX1 and a CX2, because within our proposed zoning draft, the CX pops up in 2 different places. One with 5-story max is outlined in the minutes, and in another section where it's just a 1-story max. So that might be something that needs to be corrected in the minutes.
Would you like to clarify, Leslie, or is she referring to a building type perhaps?
Yes, so there are 2 building types allowed in CX. One building type, the commercial building is only 1 story, but then the storefront is allowed to be 5 stories, and both building types are allowed everywhere geographically. So the only time that we did the separate zone, the 1, 2, 3, was when geographically we wanted them in separate places. And the reason that it's 1 and 5 is because if somebody wants to do a multi-story building, we want them to use the storefront building type as opposed to more auto-focused.
Thanks.
So does that mean that there is a correction or they're not a correction?
No,
Okay, so it's, it does not.
and I think that's. Oh, except on page 4 of the minutes, that 3rd paragraph mentions a gentleman, but it doesn't say who that is. So I wasn't sure if that
Oh,
was
yeah,
something
like his
useful.
address.
Yeah.
He's our Durham chair, but I can put his
Okay.
address in there. Just a grammatical thing there. Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
All right, so will you accept those recommended changes with your motion? Okay. And you, yes, okay. All those in favor of accepting the motions with corrections as presented? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 6-0. Is it 6?
Mhm.
Okay. And then just to make a note, we just got confirmation that Commissioner Wickland will not be.
Okay.
Needs to be excused. So moving on to item 3, discussion of the public review draft and public open house comments of the commercial zoning update. For this, I will turn it to Director Griepentrag to introduce consultant Holzer.
So I'm going to load Leslie's slides. I do also have some slides related to the other changes that I think are less discussion worthy, but we can get them later. So I'll get through or get to Leslie's first. So.
And those are also part of this item.
Yep,
So
they're
it's
all-
2 sets of slides for this item. Okay.
Yes, they're all in the memo. So I believe we're sharing.
Okay. And
Leslie's going to control the computer to move through the slides. So
okay, so and just a word on procedure, how we'll facilitate through this is we'll have the presentation, both technical questions. We'll have public comments if we have members of the public here at this time. in addition to- And then we'll go around and take a consensus on the direction that we're being asked for. So you'll notice that it's for discussion tonight, so we're just giving direction. No motions required. Is that door going to go out? I would think it would. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'm going to have a little bit of taking a step back and looking at the code as a whole and the process a little bit as a whole. I'm going to do that fairly quickly. So if you have any questions of anything that I think everybody's seen these slides several times, so I don't want to.
Well, and my expectation is that, we have three members who are in the working group, so they're very familiar with this. My expectation is the rest of us have read the material and this will make sense, and it will reinforce some previous conversations that we have, so that
Absolutely.
the questions should be pretty specific if we do have any.
Sounds good. Okay, so this process is to write the form-based code based on the comprehensive plan. We did use the comprehensive plan as our sort of guidepost. The current map, we are not looking at any areas outside the commercial corridors. So everything is within the commercial zoning that you have on the books right now, the B zones. I just do want to note that we're a little bit in between meetings 8 and 9 in order to ask you some questions based on the public open house. So we'll be coming back for that last meeting, which I think you all are aware of. In terms of the public review draft, again, I just want to kind of go over the structure a little bit because I want to pull out a couple of items that we're going to be talking about tonight. So the structure of the code is these 7 zones. The first 3 zones, the MX1, MX2, and CX, are distinctive because they require storefront on the ground floor. So anywhere where you see a purple or pinkish color, purplish color, it means storefronts are required. It also means that that's where those kinds of storefront uses are allowed in the fronts of the buildings. The other thing to note here is that MX1 and MX2 are mainly the same. Everything about them is the same with the exception of the maximum height. So MX1 is a maximum height of 4 stories. That's sort of lighter lavender color, and MX2 is a 5-story max. CX, as we just discussed, has a 5-story max for the storefront building, but only a 1-story for another one of the buildings. So overall, you can do up to 5 stories in that zone. And the other 3 key zones are the GX zones. Those do not have a requirement for storefront glass on the ground floor. They have a minimum glass requirement, but you can do storefront glass on the ground floor. But we are limiting the uses in that ground floor at the front, and that's another one of the items that we're going to talk about tonight. The RX is a only residential use, and in terms of GX1, 2, and 3, it is the same. The reason they are basically the same building types and everything pretty much. GX1, the lightest blue, is 4.5 stories. That half story is just in case that ground story is elevated slightly above the ground. GX2 is 5.5 stories, and then GX3 is 8.5 stories, which is located only in that sort of dark blue center area. All of those heights are based on the current zoning that's on the books right now, except for the GX3, which is based on the comprehensive plan, allowing 8.5 stories. So you can kind of see overall, anywhere where you see that lavender or that purple is a storefront is required in those locations. And then the blue does not have that. The same thing with those uses. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So it kind of gives you a sense of, looking at it overall, the differences between the purple and the blue. As I said before, Article 4 is completely new with, or not Article 4 is completely new. We're adding on 3 new sections to Article 4, your current zoning districts, to address the new commercial and mixed use zoning districts, along with building design and landscape and site design that is specific to those commercial and mixed use zoning districts. So those 3 all go together and don't apply to any of the other existing zones, your R and your P zones. Article 5 uses is new, and all of that applies to everything that's on your books, all of your zones, because we're pulling in the uses for the R zones and the P zones so that you now have one sort of consolidated use table that's easier to read. We did not change any of those uses in the R zones. We had to kind of match up the P zone uses based on our new zoning classifications or categories. Procedures is also new and applies to everything. And what it really does is, again, consolidates all of those procedures into one article to make it easier to find that information. So briefly, I just want to go over the commercial and mixed use zoning districts and what they incorporate. So this little sort of equation that the district is equal to the building types plus the uses is a pretty simple way of looking at it. This is conventional zoning is the same. It is a combination of the physical form aspects or the bulk requirements in conventional zoning, building types in this form-based code, plus uses. This table in the commercial and mixed use zones is about building types and which building types are allowed. We have 4 building types. Each one of those building types has a set of regulations that's organized exactly the same. And I think if you've looked at the code, you can recognize this sort of pattern of 6 pages with all of these different regulations associated with it. Each one of those 4 building types organized the same. Uses, so when you take that building types by districts and combine it with the uses by districts, that gives you a ton of information about what you're allowed to do on a particular parcel. So all of the regulations are organized in such a way to find them as quickly as possible. This is the single consolidated use table that has in yellow those residential uses that again have remained unchanged. And then we have created a series of more simplified categories of uses. And then the table uses symbols to show you whether or not it is allowed by right, allowed as a limited amount within the ground floor of or within the footprint of the building, allowed only in the upper stories or the rear of the ground story, and then if it requires a conditional use permit. And you'll notice the conditional use permit is an empty circle. There are very few of those up there now because we have hopefully addressed most of those issues with building design. We have also done a good bit of work in looking at your accessory uses. I just want to mention that because I think drive-throughs and those kinds of uses, fuel pumps is something that we talked quite a bit about during this project. And there is a specific section associated with accessory uses. Those uses are illustrated. They're pulled out and talked about so that if you want to in the future address any changes to those, then it should be easier to address them. Again, they're also consolidated in one place. And then the last part to the commercial and mixed use zones, actually there's 2 parts, the building design and the site design. And I just kind of want to draw your attention to the fact that building design is on top of the building types, addresses all of the building types, and has quite a bit about materials, windows, balconies, and those kinds of design elements that the design review board reviews on a regular basis. Finally, the procedures in that process. And really, this process is very similar to the way that it is occurring right now. It's just meant to kind of clarify it and illustrate it. We did increase notice distances and notice timing, though. Okay, so the public open house was held on the 16th of last month. We had a series of, I believe, 9 boards, and Bart and I sort of circulated, and we had, I think, every working group member showed up, except for a couple of us. So I didn't actually speak to everybody, but I think everybody was there. A lot of people were there talking, and we had some really good conversations. We did have Post-it notes available. I had thumbs up sticky notes, of which nobody really used except for Barb. And her first one was a thumbs down, and then I asked her and she put a thumbs up on something else. But so that was our method of gaining information. I also took some good notes and had some really good conversations with several people. So what I want to do tonight is talk about the kind of main topics that came forward from that public open house, as well as from submitted to emails submitted to BART. Before I kind of dive into those main topics for discussion, I do want to point out that there are some minor tweaks that have been made or are in the process of being made based on a conversation that we had with an owner in the GX3 area, of which there's very few, and it's a really limited area. I think that it makes sense to increase the ground story maximum height to 16 feet. It's a very specific location, the dark blue central area. That gives a little bit more flexibility to those kind of taller buildings and how their ground floor would be treated as more of a kind of lobby area. It was 14. So it's just a couple of feet, and truthfully, it could have been 15 with an administrative adjustment anyway. So it's just allowing for a little bit more flexibility there. It wasn't a big ask. And then we had left, if you recall, we have a top floor setback for all the 4 and 5 story buildings. And we had put that on the 8.5 story building, but honestly, by the time you're up there, it doesn't really make that much sense. So we removed that. I don't think that it would be even noticed. It's not really helpful in that location. There's a phrase, property values, in the intent statements for the design review board, and the design review board, several members had expressed that that's a really hard thing to pin down. And with all of the new intent language that we've incorporated, that it was satisfactorily sort of addressed, that we were talking about the character and the feel of the village. And so that term just really caused more difficulty than necessary. So we removed it. All it said was and property values. So it was really easy to remove. One of the things that I had left off of the flow chart in the public review draft is the pathway for conditional use permits and the special permit procedures for parking. And those have just been added. So that was I just left it off. At the last meeting, we had a question about EV fleet, electric vehicle fleet, and I have corrected in the fueling section, the fuel station section of uses, to clarify that you can still do fueling of your EV fleet because it would just basically be EV structures in parking spaces.
What is meant by fleet? Because there was that email from a resident who I think compared it to truck stops or something. So I don't care, these electric vans, or are we talking personal vehicles?
Well, a fleet would be if like your gas company had 5 trucks. So the thing is, here it would still have to be an accessory. I think what was being discussed was whether or not you would have a big parking lot of fleet vehicles, and that would require a conditional use permit. We're not allowed to have that sort of single principal use for fleet. But if you've got a business, you have an office in a building and you're parking your fleet vehicles behind the building.
Found by design, used to have 4 different. They're allowed to park their vehicles in there.
Yeah. So it's just allowing them to have charging stations for those vehicles in the parking lot. And we allow charging stations for any vehicles in any parking lot. So it was just, it didn't really make sense.
Yeah, that was confusing. Then that would be different. Let's say if the village put in a row of charging stations on our public lots, our village lots.
You can put, so the accessory structure language for EV structures, for the charging structures, can go on any parking space anywhere. What was confusing from their perspective was we have a specific use that's a fueling station that's really limited and where it can occur now. And what we said was that it excluded, that fueling station excluded fleet vehicles and trucking and so on. And so that was where it got confusing. So it was in that fueling station section. And so you can put those charging structures on any parking space anywhere. And then there's just been some typos in reorganizing it. Bart's going to read it again, and so we know we're going to have pages and pages of typos again. So, which I look forward to.
I just have a question on the property values point. I'm just looking to see where it is in the, is it in this?
So
I
it's-
would just love to see the full text.
It's in the procedures.
Like 535-28C. That's
Yes, in the intent, under A, it's the last three words. So it says promoting high quality, durable, well-designed, well-constructed, attractive building structures, landscaping, open space areas to maintain and enhance established village standards.
and property values was, now it's not problematic
Because it's very hard to determine any change in property values. And so it's just easier to understand where we're coming from with village standards. And plus we have comprehensive plan language, and we also have, we also have other intent statements that get into more detail that capture it.
Okay, thank you.
And the design review board is design professionals, and so they often felt awkward saying, I'm not an assessor, I'm not an appraiser, but I can tell you what design is.
Yeah.
And so this change was a result of their discussion at the public open house and or otherwise, because it had come up in the past and all of them felt uncomfortable with that being their charge when none of them had the expertise to do that. And so the intent is to keep this design focused, which theoretically does support property values indirectly, but not directly as something that they would review.
I would say also, and historically, the phrase property values has been utilized as a way of keeping people out. Because, you know, that you can't, there's certain changes that you can't make because it'll threaten property values, and it's been used as a weapon of, you know, sort of resistance to change that makes communities potentially more equitable or more affordable.
So that leads to my question is taking it out of the design review board when the plan commission is considering some kind of special exception or conditional use permit. But what I remember from today's draft, it's still in there as something, one of those 7 points, whatever that we need to consider.
That's a good point, because we're not qualified either.
Our conversations about reassessing the standards for review, we said we were gonna consider that later, is what I understand.
Perfect. Yeah, we can flag
It's
that.
still there.
I'm a huge
Yes.
fan for you.
Yeah, well, it concerns everything in real estate, so it's kind of hard to argue that anything would.
Right, right. So thank you for making note in the minutes that this item was flagged for future discussion.
Okay, so those are the minor tweaks. So for tonight, the three main topics for discussion are office uses on the ground floor, building height on Capitol Drive, and bird-friendly design.
Before we go into that, I just want to take a pulse of the room. Are there any concerns around the minor tweaks? Because I don't want to relitigate those later. Since they're done. I mean, I support them.
No, I had some other questions, but nothing that had.
Okay, excellent. So I'll be pretty compulsive about process tonight because I get easily confused. So. All right, so I will give it back to you.
So office uses. This was a discussion that we had with the working group on more than one occasion, several occasions actually. And the way that we were addressing it was that, so office uses tend to kind of deaden locations along commercial corridors. And you can see the two examples on the right. They have typically want to block out windows. So having storefront windows and then putting shades on them and blocking them out tends to make those sections of the corridor pretty dead. And so if you recall, we were looking at, the corridors as having both blue and purple along the corridors. And what you see on the left-hand side are salons and spas that have wide open windows, window signs. You can kind of see what's going on inside. They're interesting to walk by. And people might go in and out. They have what we call permeable fronts on them, whereas those are pretty blank. And I heard a lot about those kind of blank facades in our listening sessions early on from several people. And so it was something that we wanted to really address. Additionally, during the community workshops, we had some discussions about, for example, this building, which is now partially vacant. We had some discussions about whether or not it should be a blue GX, which would allow those office uses on the ground floor, or whether or not we wanted it to become an MX storefront, considering that the other 3 corners have commercial uses within them. So this is diagonally across the street. Is it no,
Kensington.
yeah, it is Kensington. Trust myself. From the Collectivo Coffee. So there's a lot of activity at this intersection, except for at this corner. And so we consciously asked what should happen. And overwhelmingly, everybody said active ground floor storefront uses. So just to kind of get at this discussion about and concern about not allowing office types of uses in those purple and lavender MX locations. Because right now, those uses are allowed only in the upper stories or in the rear of the ground story. I just wanted to show you these kind of images and sort of separate them. One of the things that I do want to do is look at a salon and spa very specifically against a kind of a dental office. And I actually had a conversation with a dentist at the open house. And I think he came away, understanding what we were going for. Just before I go on to the other slides, I do want to note that in the building design section, which is this sort of purple box down there, we do have some regulation that Bart is going to freak out about for the rest of his life. Unobstructed windows and how you enforce those. But we did very carefully craft some language that says on ground floors, on primary streets, we should not have any kind of window covering within the first 12 inches or any kind of opaque window covering within the first 12 inches to avoid that sort of blank look, because even storefronts sometimes will do that kind of thing, which we have seen with a certain grocery store. We also talk about furnishings turning backwards. So having display cases that are blocking the windows, their backs to the windows. The idea of those windows is to sort of open them up and have that permeability. So that is in the code applying to all of these ground floors. So that said, what I wanted to do was, before we have the discussion about the office uses, do a little bit of comparison of the salon and spa versus the dentist office. If you look at the use table, I've highlighted the 2 use categories that incorporate those. And I'm going to blow those up here. I just sort of pulled them out of the use table. So consumer service has a subcategory called, I think, improvement services, which allows for things like an acupuncturist or a massage therapist or a hair salon or a dog grooming facility. So it's improvement services. And those are allowed by right in the ground floor of everything. So that's that. The black circles that you see. So they are allowed by right in all of those zones, not in the RX zone. Medical dental clinic or office is only allowed with that sort of filled in top, permitted as of right in the upper stories and in the rear of the ground story behind 20 feet of an allowed as of right use. So I'm going to add that to the key because I think people sort of miss that in the text and then put a reference to the text in the language. But the idea is that within that first 20 feet, you want to have active uses, permeable uses, people kind of seeing things for sale and going in and out of that storefront. And then you can always have a medical office or a dental office in the rear. So an optometrist is a really good example of that. They sell the eyeglasses in the front, they put them in the windows and have nice displays. People can walk in and look at the glasses. They need to go to the doctor is usually in the back. They're not usually in the storefront, right? So that's the way that we've sort of structured this. Within the language of consumer service and medical or dental office, so the definition of those two categories, the consumer service improvement service literally says walk-in consultations or appointments are typically allowed and retail goods supporting the business are on display and for sale. So that's one of the main differences between a salon and spa and a dental office or clinic. Dental office or clinic's language says where appointments are typically scheduled in advance. So the idea there is if you have a spa that sells spa materials in the front, you can walk in and buy something, or you can walk in and say, is there an appointment available for the massage therapist? You can go in and do that. Whereas if you're a massage therapist in a dental office, a medical office, usually those are, you have to see the doctor and then go to them, right? So that's where all that language kind of comes from. And then you don't have to worry so much about those locations along the sidewalk being pretty dead from the medical or dental office. So again, looking at where those are allowed, there are several of those medical or dental office uses that fall right now within the purple area. So they will become non-conforming, legal non-conforming uses that can continue to exist forever unless they go vacant for a year and then they aren't allowed to go anymore. So any of them that exist can continue to exist. We have done a little bit of remapping in a location. So right at Capitol and Oakland on just point here. These little sort of cottage commercial buildings have a dentist's office in them. And we looked at that and said, well, that location is kind of hard to park at. So in terms of requiring it to be ground floor storefront, I think it makes sense to allow that to be GX. And so we switched that to be GX, just those 4 parcels right there, 3 or 4 parcels right there. And then the other thing that we did was we looked very specifically at the definition of those 2 categories of uses and made sure that we were allowing things like acupuncturists that might allow for walk-in and might sell other things in the front would fall within that consumer service category and didn't need to be specific to medical or dental. So we did do some tweaks based on those early conversations, and then decided that after we did those few revisions, that we would pull medical and dental office out of the general office category. So it would be its own line item, so that if you ever did want to address those separately, it'd be super easy for staff to just change the bubbles in the table. And what we discussed was allowing it to keeping the same structure and then revisiting it maybe in a year to see what the effect has been. Are you getting a whole bunch of these businesses coming in that don't have a place to go? And as you can see from the map, there's a lot of blue on that map. So there are a lot of locations for them to go. What we're trying to do is just preserve the sort of I know Bart doesn't like this term, that it's a hard term to define, but that vibrancy and that activity on the sidewalk in front of those purple areas. So what we'd like to know is our strategy is to keep it as is, and then to revisit it after a year or 6 months, or if you hear that it's becoming an issue, and then we can figure out maybe another solution in between. So it's trying to kind of think long term that over time these uses are going to migrate to the blue areas on the map.
So restating what you just presented is the as is. Okay. So, so at this time, are there questions? And if there aren't technical questions, then I just like to go around and hear a round of thoughts. So technical questions about, to quantify understanding or to confirm understanding?
I guess when I hear reassess in a year, what does that look like in terms of?
I can give you an example. So the parking changes that we made, I think 2 years ago, were approved conditioned upon a 6-month review. And so at that point, staff promised to provide a report to the village board in terms of what the parking numbers look like. So if you're okay with this strategy, it would simply be me scheduling, a year out. So if we adopt it, say in February 2023, I would come back with a report in terms of whether or not we denied any office uses or there's larger amounts of vacancies, things like that. So the specifics of the report, I don't know offhand, but it's been precedent that when the board has approved things that we promise to provide updates. So I would simply put that in my work plan to come back, whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year, whether it's something differently. So that's how we have addressed that in the past with other ordinance changes.
I will also say that I think the bid is aware of this and probably will be, keeping track and keeping an eye on it too, right? And
Correct. Yes, they did. They have discussed it.
But would it go the other direction? Like we're turning MX to GX, that'd be more friendly for medical. As proposed, right? You're converting a few of the MX.
Oh, we already did.
That's done, right? So I'm saying, so then what are we watching for? I want to make sure I'm tracking it. Like, is it just generally?
Yes.
For general?
So, I mean, there would be several ways that you could address it. One is that you could, you could rezone sections, or you could.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure, what are we watching for?
High rates of vacancies, businesses being turned away, businesses complaining.
Correct. I would say vacancies is the primary thing that we hear concern about, because it's not necessarily that people want a clinic. Some people believe that we don't have enough storefront uses. They're saying no one else is going to occupy that space. We shouldn't turn away a clinic. But if we don't have vacancies, that means that there are businesses that are willing to occupy that space that's within the strategy would work. So if in a year we find out that, we have problems filling those spaces, then we could discuss whether or not specific spaces or the term in general should be modified to allow for clinics to go into those.
And again, we're in this situation, taking MX spaces and making them more potentially possible for GX.
Or changing the use tables. So
Or the
that
use
they're
tables.
not-
Okay, thank you.
Or modifying making it a conditional use for those clinics to go in, based on some other.
So you can change the
there's
zoning
other
or
options for what could happen.
Thanks.
But I do think that out of most places, we do try to do this sort of management, and it really does help, because once you have a block face that is an active storefront, active storefront uses, then you have more active storefront uses that want to come in. And so it can help to feed that activity over time.
Can you maybe just describe for me a little bit better when we talk about active storefronts and a 5-foot street light? Are we talking daytime hours? Because no matter what the storefront business is, they're not going to be open till 9 o'clock. I mean, even driving over here tonight, once it starts to get past 6, City Market starts winding things down. So I'm just wondering kind of, what does that look like when we use those words?
Yeah, so that typically what we're talking about are a high level of permeability. Businesses where when you walk by them, you just go into them to shop or to buy, food or drink. So it's that kind of high activity of people kind of moving in and out of into the interior of the building from the sidewalk and back. Plus, there are uses that you look at through the windows. You can walk past people getting their nails done, or walk past people getting their hair done, or walk past people that are eating, or walk past the storefront of goods that people are selling.
As opposed to just walking past, period.
Right.
Right, but we don't regulate the use, like you have to be open until 11.
Right, that's
So
what I'm just wondering.
that would be a
What
separate.
are we're kind of aiming for?
Yeah,
We're trying to increase that market.
We're trying to regulate use and encourage use. We don't regulate how much it's used and what hours. Yeah. That's right. Okay. So, can we just do a show of hands of support for what's being presented? Thumbs up.
We didn't finish going around saying what we thought.
Oh,
So this wasn't an issue that I really had strong feelings about one way or the other, and it's not like the working group took a vote or anything like that. But Kathy Stokebrand, who was in the working group, unfortunately was ill when we had our open house. She and Jake Brissett, the president of the bid, seemed to have some concern about this. I think, again, because, we don't want to turn away businesses. And so when I think back to like the last few years and the conditional use permits that we've had, applications we've had come to us, seems like they were either workout places or medical places, whether it was the IV vitamin place, or some kind of clinic. And, sure, I was Sendix and be able to walk through and see in that. But it seems like if we want to have services that the residents will use, having medical offices, we just approved an orthodontist in the Mosaic building. It just isn't, I don't know. I'm okay with allowing that use. I'm not as concerned as Trustee Stokebrand or Jake was, but seems okay.
so you'd be in support of this or
I'd be in support of still
allowing in the MX?
and maybe if there's a new business, that concern could be, as far as like the blinds in front, could be worked out when you look at their floor plan. Maybe the waiting room and the reception area is what you see through the windows. So there aren't blinds down, in front of treatment rooms.
Okay. So, Trustee Kudo.
Just to sort of go off that, when you're talking about the 12 inches, the setback from those types of, is there, obviously if there's some businesses that are just not going to have, they're not permeable, right? It's just, you don't need, there was a chiropractor office that used to be next to 31 Flavors, which is not great clips, but like, there's some things you don't need to see and people don't want to be seen doing. And, but there's still vibrant parts of the community. There's still interaction of people coming and going just because they use one. This is sort of going off of what you said, is because they're using one thing doesn't mean they won't, at that point, wouldn't walk across to go to Benji's or wouldn't walk across the street and go to Bentley's or whatever. And so I do have some concern about minimizing opportunity. Even if it's a medical facility, and I agree the healthcare office at Ascension, they could do something with those windows, right? Was there any discussion about sort of requiring displays if you don't want to use the windows, right? I believe the verbiage was that displays were allowed or displays are allowed.
Mm-hmm.
But was there any discussion about requiring displays if you're going to be that type of business that shouldn't have a permeable storefront, but still allows some interaction, and maybe I'm thinking of like Michigan Avenue or something like that, where there's, big displays, but something that's appropriate.
Grand flowers.
Yeah, just something that you can look at that is presentable to the street that isn't a drawn blind.
Yeah, and I think the language that we have in that unobstructed windows section is, we're trying to kind of do a tightrope of creating an enforcement nightmare and allowing windows.
Enforcement.
Avoiding an enforcement nightmare.
You okay with creating
Sorry,
an enforcement?
sorry.
No, she's
With that
well aware of my
We're trying to write something that balances between what you have to enforce and what we desire. And to require some sort of window display in everything is, that's a lot to ask for. For example, I had floated at the eyeglass place at the intersection of Capitol and Oakland.
Mhm.
They don't even have any glasses in the windows. They just have posters in the windows. And so I had floated, well, maybe they should at least be displaying their goods. But it's just really becomes difficult to manage what people are doing on the inside. And the attorneys are concerned about managing what they're doing on the inside. The attorney said that they were comfortable with that 12 inches. And so that 12 inches addresses, you know, the blinds and how you block up windows that you're requiring. And it addresses the furniture, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't get too concerning. The reason that it says window displays are allowed is because I have written codes where you had to be able to see through the glass into the interior of the building. And what we're saying is, no, well, we're letting you block that up to 48 inches and do like a little display. That's what that language is getting at. So it's a, you know, it's a tough sort of thing to manage in a zoning code too. So we're trying very carefully to do it. And I will say, I just want to clarify that those businesses are allowed in the upper stories. They're allowed in the rear of the ground floor. All we're talking about is 20 feet behind that glass and activating that area behind the glass. And, you know, again, look at all of the blue. There's a lot of blue on that map, even like kind of interwoven amongst those storefront requirements. So what we're trying to do is just kind of tighten up those storefront areas so that they can be a little bit more successful, because, you know, it's the first thing I learned in planning school. We did this little thing that said, you know, when you have hot dog stands on the beach, after, you know, so many months of those hot dog stands locating on that beach, where will the hot dog stands be? And the answer is they will be clustered all together on one end of the beach, because that's where they want to be. They want to be next to businesses like them, because that's where you're gonna shop.
I have a comment just about that cluster factor. I see this really as a tool for economic development. And I think sometimes when we talk about increasing regulations, that scares people. Okay, you know, what does this mean in terms of vacant storefronts? So I think highlighting that fact moving forward will maybe help to allay people's concerns as to, you know, are we turning away businesses and then doing this strategy with having an assessment in a year, then we'll know, we'll have the data to prove that.
And we can even do it 2 years in a row, because a year isn't that much time in retail or vacancy land, so. Okay, Trace, is anything?
So if somebody has a clinic and they use the first 20 feet for their lobby and they sell postcards, that's not okay? You know?
So that first 20 feet has to be a use that's defined in the code. So if they can convince us that that is a retail service use or retail use, then yes.
So then they can have their chiropractor office in the back.
Yeah, so like Shorewood Family Physicians has a pretty extensive inventory of like wellness formula. If they were in a storefront, they could put that all in the front.
Right.
But then the use still a problem? Right?
It'd be an MDC, right? A medical, dental.
It's still medical dental.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And you can have two primary uses in a tenant space.
So that's what's a little bit different of this code. It's a mixed use code. So you don't have to have one principal use. You don't have to define one principal use of the in a building. Although
You can,
you can, but the idea is that you would be a retail use and a medical dental.
So that's a way to put things where you want.
so it just requires some creativity. So if you want to use that back for a clinic space, you're gonna have to also propose something for that first 20 feet that is a defined use that would be enforced and regulated. And that would allow you to have that use in the back.
So or you were a dentist and you had like brushes, mouthwash and floss for sale. I mean, that's kind of stretching it, you know.
That is stretching it, but
I think
theoretically,
everyone understands.
Yeah.
I guess I guess I would.
Yeah.
Is there?
For flexibility,
Yeah.
agility in the code. You don't become rigid.
Mhm.
Leslie, that you had talked about those buildings, those small cottage-like buildings that were blue and mentioned the parking, that public parking structure that's behind it, it's shaded lavender right now because it was, I think, part of that PDD. But that's not really like a misuse storefront, like say at some point that parking structure is not going to be turned into something else. Or are we saying we're going to leave that open to that possibility?
It's just matching, but that's a good point. We know,
I was gonna say, I think that is a good point. That probably
nobody
should be
ever brought
blue.
that up. Yeah, that probably should be blue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's
No.
always, yep, like you said, there's
Make it
still gonna
up.
be typos in this thing, so that's why we're here.
I have a pencil. Oh, thank you.
All right, anybody who has spoken? Josh, you asked your question, right? Okay, so show of hands, thumbs up or thumbs down? Just- Okay, majority thumbs up.
Okay, great. Okay, so the second item is heights along East Capitol. And we've had this conversation several times as well. So what I wanted to do was just to kind of point out, I've already talked a little bit about where the heights are allowed. There's a lot on this map, isn't there? The 5 stories max goes from Oakland to Frederick.
Made sure she could see.
Yeah. And then this block, so this darker blue here is 8.5 stories. And this 8.5 stories is from the comprehensive plan. So the current zoning code says 5 stories all the way to Frederick. So that's this and this. And that's the way it's mapped here. Everything from Frederick east is 4 stories max in your current code. And what I've done here is just put the heights of the buildings, the current heights of those physical buildings. And you can see there's a couple of 6.5 story, a couple of 4 story, the new, not yet constructed 4 story at Stoll, and then several other 1 to 2.5 story heights in there.
And basically those could stay as they are unless somebody makes, what is it? An extensive renovation or
Yes,
demolish.
yes. I have images if we
And
want
then
to
they
go
could
back. and
rebuild a
look.
2-story building. It doesn't have to be 4.
Absolutely. It has to be at least 2 stories. So I have images if we need to go back and look, but you can see some of the taller buildings that are located. I think that the concern has been that there is this residential. So this is the south side. This is the gas station here. And then the residential here. This block is this sort of second square is the block with the new development on it. This is a block of existing buildings on the north side with 2 stories. They're all 2 stories. One of the things that I do want to point out, though, is that for this particular parcel, it abuts an R zone on 2 sides. And in the code, there's a minimum 15-foot step back on the top floor. And then there is a required 5-foot that's a setback that's required. So there would be about 20 feet for that 4-story to occur on the very top. We also discussed in the open house that that is a gas station right now and would have, some environmental limitations on it. But that is what you see here. So the question really is, and we did talk about it at one meeting when Barb proposed it and she wrote a proposal, and we did a kind of a straw poll, and the working group did not recommend limiting the heights in this area, but
3 stories.
to 3 stories. But the question is, do we want to address that, and do we want to?
Because we did get, it came up at the open house and then we did get emails about it. So
Okay.
so that's why it's being, so it came out of working group with a recommendation of 4 stories. But it's being brought to us tonight because there has been additional discussion by some of the same people.
And so that's what we're looking for. So question?
Yeah, so can you walk through the logic for me when you're looking at, all the way to Prospect, right? And I understand 4 stories, we already have that apartment building, kitty corner from St. Roberts. But then we start to get into the residential portion of East Capitol Drive, right? And we have the houses on Prospect and Stoll. And like I'm not here to renegotiate Stoll, so it is what it is. But why continue the 4-story as opposed to having a gradual down to the 2-story or gradual reduction into the more residential portions of that street?
So when there is a comprehensive plan that we're writing the code based on, typically I do not readdress the comprehensive plan in great detail. And the concern here is that there are so many aspects of that comprehensive plan that we're hanging this code on, that we don't want to just change that. We also had discussion at the community workshops about it and within the working group about it. And it didn't seem to gain any traction in either of those, but we're still talking about it. So it's obviously still a question. From a planning perspective, I'm not here. I'm here to just tell you why we ended up the way that we did. And I'm happy to talk about whatever else you'd like to.
And you did point out, and the comprehensive plan does address it as well in terms of stepping back at residential property lines. And so the code does address specifically when it does, because you're talking about how it blends into residential areas. So the way the code does that is with that step back. The district itself was kept whole in terms of regulations, but what's treated differently is when it does touch residential parcels, which that gas station does, that's when the additional regulation of a step back for that 4th-story would come into play. So that is how the current code and the comprehensive plan address the blending into residential areas.
Yeah, all along here, the step backs would be required.
So it's anywhere where it's touching. And we also have a front step back that we've incorporated off the primary street. So all in all, that 4th story on that corner would be pretty limited. The canopy is about 25 feet wide on that gas station.
You have those, all right, so it's a commercial district all the way up to Downer. There happens to be some homes on it that could be turned in, if something happened. It could be
Not
rezoned.
like happened, it was like 100-year-old houses. They didn't just show up.
Yeah, but
And your point was that
that is our commercial district. In commercial districts don't say taper, they just begin. So I'm struggling with why would we taper down the height of the buildings there? What does that bring?
I guess I disagree with they just begin. I mean, I think that there are residents that live there that have concerns about 1 block away being a building twice the height of the current buildings. I mean, when those folks bought those buildings, when they bought their homes, none of those buildings existed at 4 stories. And so while we may determine that it is a business corridor or a commercial zone, it's different than what these folks bought. And so if we're going to change it and it's going to look different, I want to know why, and they're going to want to know why. And I think they have, every right to ask those questions.
So they can do 4 stories now. I don't know
It's just-
when that changed, but
I'll tell you, it changed in 2007. The zoning changes were put through by our previous village manager and previous planning director. So these haven't been like etched in granite for, decades and decades. Since
And the zoning code never is, which we've discussed. So
Exactly. And since this is my cause, I'll kind of take you to my thinking, so maybe you can understand that. And I will say that even though Trustee Stokbrand was the only person voting with me, if maybe the 6 to 8 people at that meeting, you've probably gotten more emails saying, yes, we want it to be smaller height than we've had people at that meeting. So during the course of working on this project, I've driven up the length of Capitol and Oakland to just kind of see, are there other areas that we need to adjust? Because when the plan commission worked on the comprehensive plan, and I wanted to change the zoning here, Bart said, no, we'll change that. You know, we don't discuss zoning until we change the zoning code. So here's our opportunity. This 4-block stretch is really unique among the quadrants. And so when I proposed this 3-story limit, starting at Maryland, it's because at that intersection, you have 2 schools. And so this little stretch here is really more institutional and residential than it is commercial, as say the northern half of Oakland is. So we have a lot of kids a couple times a day, and then plus walking to the library, excuse my voice, to the playgrounds at Atwater School or at Atwater Park. I hate to see it dwarfed as that church just to the west of Walgreens was. You know, that's like the gem of the east side of Shorewood. And so we want that to stand out. And again, someone mentioned we have single, or maybe Eric mentioned that we've got single and maybe 2-family residences as we move further east. And the buildings, they do get shorter. It's a very narrow street. I would also argue that we keep that gas station at its current location rather than rezone it, because Downer and Lake Drive are both prime commuting routes for those who work downtown or off get the freeway, you know, down at the lakefront. And so that's a convenient stop for them to stop for service, or just go walk and fill up, you know, get gas for their lawnmower or fill their child's bike tires up where they are. So it is very unique. It is more residential. It's quieter. I don't think that every quadrant of our commercial corridor needs to be as active. You know, west of Oakland, we've got those 4 lanes of traffic with the boulevard. We're having more auto-centered businesses there. That's appropriate. But I think on this whole stretch, it's just much quieter. I've listened to residents for the last 8.5 years talk about zoning, starting with the, you know, the Brownies project, what everybody thought. And when people come before us or write to us, no matter whether it's about the Lakebrook project or the Stoll project, and also having lived on Downer Avenue for 33 years, I'm very familiar with the vibe and the feeling for this eastern part of Shorewood. So, I mean, I love watching things get built, but I just want to have appropriate development that doesn't completely change the character. Because one reason I voted for this form-based code when we worked on the comp plan is because Bart said we're going to go block by block and make sure that the new things are going to be an appropriate fit for the surrounding buildings. And even in our minutes, we talked about the balance is about reflecting the character of Shorewood. At the Shorewood is the same time as designing for the future. So I think that's the goal. We've got some areas south of Capitol, we've got more residences, apartment buildings. North of Capitol, we have more retail shops and restaurants and bars. And this area is more institutional residential. So I think that as we, you know, have new development, we just don't want to change the character and what drew residents, you know, to live there in the first place. I see my voice. I got one here, but just mentioned more
You
things.
want those, trust me.
I am. Thanks.
I think it might be helpful if either Bart or Leslie, if maybe you could touch upon some of the discussion that we had during the working group about land use. Because I think I'm hearing this comment about changing the character of the neighborhood. And what we had discussed was if you were to have a restaurant or another type of use in that space, that's, it seems to be that we're talking about one parcel in particular, which is the gas station, that might actually have a larger impact upon the neighborhood than the distinction between a 3-story apartment complex versus a 4-story. So I think that might be helpful for the commission to hear.
I have one last thing. Also, we're really only, if we take St. Robert's out of the picture, because that's not going anywhere, we're we're really just talking about 3 blocks on the north side of the street, 2.5 blocks on the south side. And if you, as you drive around the commercial area, you'll see that with a handful of notable exceptions, most of our apartment buildings are 3 stories high. They may be 100 years old, but they're 3 stories high. So it's not like a huge ask or totally exceptional to think that that's an appropriate height for new construction. And also remember that parking is restricted from Capitol South to 2 hours per day during the week, as well as on Downer and Prospect. More taller office buildings, taller apartment buildings. You're gonna have more people looking for a place to park. But we have some restrictions in that area. Okay, now I'm done.
So Kate asked to hear some.
Yeah, I could take an initial stab. So like I mentioned, the way that the code addresses the height discussion would be to step back. And so that in the development of the code, that was specifically written into when you abut an R district, that the height would not be allowed to be that 4-story right up to it, which is what addresses, the church on behind, the Walgreens and things of that nature. So with respect to height, that's where the conversation led. With respect to use,
So when it's like it addresses it, it means it provides a remedy for that concern.
correct.
Mhm.
Allowing what the code currently allows, the comprehensive plan allows where appropriate, but where not appropriate, directly abutting in our district, it has to do that step back. So that's my perspective on how that question was addressed. With respect to land use, we discussed in terms of, that if that parcel that we're discussing, the garage, gas station, was developed as a 4-story residential building, it probably wouldn't have a greatest impact in the neighborhood as, say, if it were a brewery with outdoor dining. And so in terms of the character of the land use, that was, to me, the bigger discussion in terms of, I don't know that adding a residential 4-story building there impacts the neighborhood as much as, say, a outdoor brewery that has, crowds until 10 p.m. at night or things of that nature. So when you're discussing character, we just discussed in the working group that character is more than height. Character is the use. And so, Barbara mentioned she'd like to see the gas station stay there. I'm sure a lot of people would. Some people don't want to. In terms of, walkability, those driveways with cars coming in and out frequently, that's not necessarily a walkable environment for children going to St. Robert's or the park, et cetera, either. So the use oftentimes drives more of the neighborhood character and context than perhaps just the height. So that's what the working group, in my memory, discussed. If I'm off on that, please let me know, and you can fill in Leslie as well.
Yeah, and it is important to note that we asked very specific questions in the 3rd community workshop about the gas stations, and was pretty overwhelming to keep the gas stations as they were defined in the comprehensive plan as being in that western edge of Capitol. But
Well, and we're also going to possibly eliminate the zoning for the one on Oakland to south of Capitol, which doesn't leave any on the eastern half of the village. And that's also why I think it's important to retain that.
So what's zoning for a gas station?
CX,
I see. So
that's the 1-story CX.
got it.
And remember, the current gas stations can remain. So
Right.
as long as it's a viable
Right.
use,
Exactly.
that one south of Oakland, this one in the corner can remain. It's
Right.
in terms of if it ever goes vacant,
Right.
because
That's
perhaps we've switched to electric vehicles and there's no need for a, physical fuel station, that's when we're saying you would change it to this other use. But in the meantime, all of these gas stations, if they're profitable, can definitely remain.
So, Josh, you were in the working group. Is there anything you want?
I don't think this is a material like change. Four is fine. I just think it's going to create code complexity for you if you have variances. It wouldn't? Pardon?
it will.
Yeah, that's what
It will.
I'm just not sure why this is material.
Well, Chuck was in the working group for you.
But that part summarized your discussion pretty well. I do remember talking about what would happen. I even talked about a pizza place that I had eaten at recently. Wauwatosa, that was a former gas station. 1-story. And it was busy.
But to the point of Barbara's discussion, I have said this is the time to do it, and that's why we're here. And so The working group was not a recommending body. The working group was set up to provide you with the draft.
Mhm.
You as the plan commission are the recommending body, which is why we're here to ask that question, because it's something that continues to linger in discussion and or in meetings. And so the purpose of tonight's conversation really is to get the pulse of the plan commission as a recommending body. Once again, the village board does not have to accept your recommendation. So if the conversation keeps going. And so I've been open with the board involved, like, I just need to be able to give the voices their chance to hear it. I don't get to vote. Leslie doesn't get to vote. Ultimately, it is a board decision. At this point, the plan commission will just be recommending which version that we send there, but that doesn't mean the village board itself can't, make that change too. So we're here for the conversation. I just want to caution you, this conversation will continue to go, so I don't want to belabor it too much. But yeah, the working group had it. We're here for your purposes so that we can take direction tonight to make that change for the recommended version, hopefully that we'll discuss in January.
So to be clear, the question is, should we change all or part of the capital zoning to 3 stories?
So first, I'd like to see if there's anybody on the virtual that wants to speak. I don't know how we turn this.
I could maybe say something.
If you want to raise your hand, if any of the 3 of you want to speak.
We'll be taking public comment at this time, so please raise your hands, and we'll call on you. And Therese? Okay, did you have something to say?
I was just, listening and I'm looking at the map and a lot of what Barb talked about, you could apply to other parts of the district, word for word. There's schools here on the south side. Oakland. Narrow streets, there's residential. There's kids. I think it should be 4 stories because it's a portion.
Kate? Then we'll go to public comment.
Just one additional comment that I'd like for us to avoid utilizing this form-based code as a way to usurp the comprehensive planning process. I see this code as an output of that comprehensive planning process. And so I wouldn't want us to bypass what was done. And it looks like that was adopted last year, right?
Zoom user, if you could turn on your camera and say your name and your address, please.
Okay, hold on a second here. Mark Warhus, can you hear me?
I can. Can you turn on your camera?
I'm trying.
Okay. It's not required.
Okay. Yeah.
And we did receive your email, Mr.
All right.
Williams.
Okay, this is Mr. Mark Warhus, 4071 North Stowell. And I just wanted to agree with Barbara, who is saying that this is a quiet residential neighborhood and with a lot of families and kids. And I personally think that 3 stories will have some impact, but if you go to the 4 stories on the part between Maryland and Downer, I think that's going to have a real impact on the feel of those places and the appeal of those places. So I'll just put my 2 cents on that. I think 3 stories is a tolerable height there. And given the nature of that neighborhood with the church and everything, I just think it's something you should consider putting a 3-story limit there. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Any other members of the public on the Zoom that would like to speak? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or coming off mute.
I'm going to close public comment and I would like to, I think we should just go around the room and say 4 or 3, and that'll be your direction.
The other options would be a different road. So Barbara, your recommendation was Maryland, correct?
Correct.
So if you want to say 3 the different road, we'd also be happy to take that perspective in as well. So I think that the height and the location would be the 2 things that we're looking to receive consensus on some level.
All right, Josh, you want to start? I was just going to go around.
Or
With what street?
I would make it all
As-
4 all the way. So
Okay.
from Frederick over, right? Because it's 5 into Frederick.
Or Farwell?
Frederick is the.
Oh, I see.
So
Yep,
from
thank
Frederick
you.
to
Yep.
Downer.
All right, thank you. Okay, you got that? Okay.
3 Prospect Avenue East.
3 stories from Maryland to Downer. I do want to revisit the northwest corner of Murray and Capitol when we're through with this discussion.
Okay.
Keeping it consistent across the district, 4 stories from Frederick down.
I'd say to be consistent with the comprehensive planning process, 4 stories.
I support 4 stories. So where does that leave us?
4-2.
4-2. Direction. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll just put public hearing at the village board in my calendar.
Yeah. Oh, I know you'll be
Yes.
there. Don't worry.
You got a Marie comment as well,
Yeah.
Barbara?
My friend Vicki and I were looking at the map, and one thing when we were looking at this at the public open house, what I thought we needed here was to know, like, okay, what were the heights? So we kind of discovered that at that northwest corner of Murray and Capitol, those purple ones, those were quite a bit higher than, than I had thought. Because I know when we did the comp plan, we said really we just wanted to have the highest buildings at the southeast corner of Oakland and Capitol. And again, considering that yes, we have like Kitty Corner, some high buildings across from an elementary school. Maybe 5 is just a little too high right next to Atwater there.
So to look at the whole,
Yeah, that's like right now, there's a salon on the corner, the surf shop is there. And the sneaker place,
Tahoe store.
tattoo place, I can't think what else is there.
And the AT&T building.
And again, that building could be there for like another 50 years. But you
So-
can look to the possibilities.
5 stories is from Frederick, basically west. And then from Menlo south. And that's based on the current zoning. Okay, so you want to propose to the group?
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that I think that those dark purple, is that what those are, purple or dark blue? Those should be 4-story and not 5.
Okay, let's go around.
And are the buildings to the left, to the west of them, where it says 3.5? Are those going to be zoned for 4-story?
No, 5.
It's 5 through Frederick.
It's 5 from.
On the north side of the street is where I'm looking.
Correct.
north and south. 5.
To the top, the key on the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the 5-story key, it goes here, and the 4 stories is there. So
Yeah, maybe it's just that when we talk about tall buildings from the comp plan, we were thinking really tall, in that southeastern corner. So it was just very surprising that there were going to be anything above 4 stories across the street.
So
When
would
you
you like
think-
to make a proposal at this time? that the
Yeah,
group can
Then
respond to?
I would say those buildings on the northwest corner of Murray Capitol should be limited, at least those first couple.
Okay.
Where there's going to be probably crossing guard, limit those to 4 stories.
Okay.
So are
So
you
if
talking just one, the ones that are labeled 1 and 2, or are you
Yes.
talking 1, 2, 3.5,
No, the 1
3.5?
and 2. And
So,
hopefully
I
nothing
want-
will change with those, but
yeah. I would just like to hear from the group. Is anyone in support of that?
when you think about like where Lake Bluff School is, there were
Right,
tall
but
buildings.
let's
really
wait for the group.
Okay.
That close to the corridor, I mean, I'm fine with 5. Yeah, I don't have any problems with 5. Sorry.
It's okay.
5, 3.
Okay.
Wasn't at the top of my list, but I thought.
It's, hey, this is the time,
Great.
right?
Okay, great. So that answers that second question then. Thank you.
Can I excuse myself for a bio break real quick? I don't know if you need to hear or not, but
Does
I
anyone-
drank too much water to preserve my voice and I was dancing over here.
Can we revisit the gas station? We can really say yay or nay on gas.
We can clarify, so, in favor of as presented or CX, right? So,
Right.
so we'll go around this time.
Can you clarify that?
Sure. You can see on the southwest corner of Downer and Capitol, a little purple square. That's got a 1. There's a gas station there. The new owners are good. They took out the service base and they're converted into more of a quick mart, which would be great for snacks and whatnot. But we're rezoning it for mixed use 4 stories. And
If
so,
it changes, yeah.
yes, and the same thing with the building on South Oakland. So only drive-throughs allowed in the future, there's a change, will be on the western half of Oakland. So let's say the North Shore Bank decides to leave Shorewood, a drive-through would not be allowed there. So no drive-throughs except
For Culvers.
west of Oakland.
So your proposal is?
To keep that zone CX 1 story.
Okay, so interest in keeping that,
And just so the eastern half of the village has a service
I
station.
understand.
Yeah,
so, so the question is rezone for 4 mix. It's being proposed to turn MX1. Barbara is proposing to keep it CX. So I want to go around and say, I want to hear MX1 or CX or another idea. So we'll start with Therese this time.
I say here with NX1. Gives more flexibility.
MX1, MX1, MX1.
Next one.
Next one.
yeah. And again, this wasn't the top of my radar, but it was something that Kathy Storkman said, hey, we need to keep the gas
Yeah.
station there. So
Yeah.
she may fight for that at the village board. We'll see.
That's great. We'll be there.
I have a question. So let's say we zoned it for CX1 and the property owner sold it and the new owner wanted to come and put up something taller, 2, 3, 4 stories. They could apply for a zoning change, correct?
They can do a storefront building in CX up to 5 stories. So you would have been upzoning it to 5
Yeah.
stories.
You wanna- Careful how you wish for.
I would have brought that up, but they could have done that. Okay, next. Okay, so the last topic that rose to the top was bird-friendly design. This is actually something that we, in the working group, sort of said we wanted to come to you all to ask this question. So, and Chuck has been immensely helpful. And so the current bird-friendly design section, the page is shown over there on the right. And there are 2 pieces of this that we sort of have been bouncing back and forth and still are questioning, and we wanted to pass it through to you all. Right now, it is the applicability of the bird-friendly design requirements is triggered only with a building that is 10,000 square feet or larger. Total 10,000 square feet. And this is based on this whole section on bird-friendly design is written based on the Madison, Wisconsin code, which is probably the one code in Wisconsin that has been in place, but is actually being challenged right now. The question is whether or not 10,000 square feet is a good trigger for a village the size of Shorewood. If we would have gotten this in before all of these recent mixed-use buildings were built, it would have applied to all of those. But now we're not sure how many of those buildings would actually apply. And just as a sort of scale, the Hayek building is about 8,000 square feet. So there aren't even a lot of buildings out there that are, existing buildings that would trigger it. Another part to keep in mind is in terms of applicability, what we're talking about is treating the surface with something that would let the birds know there's glass, there's something there to keep them from hitting it and dying. There is also, you can kind of see it below the orange box, there is a minimum size of glass. So windows that are 50 square feet or less also do not apply. So all of those sort of upper story windows of the Hayek building would not need to have bird-friendly design. But the ground floor storefront, we probably would want them to. So the question is, should we lower the threshold to something more sort of Village of Shorewood scale, which is about 5,000 square feet, which would mean buildings of this size? It wouldn't then apply really to the kind of mom and pop smaller ones that are maybe a 20 or 30 foot width and about 100 feet deep that are especially to single stories. Or we could remove the threshold because my city, Evanston, Illinois, also just passed a bird-friendly design that Chuck read before I did. And they have no threshold at all. And the other part of the Evanston code is that it applies to both new construction and renovations that include replacement of all windows. I will note that right now, that is a little bit of an issue in terms of approval process because we don't currently review, nobody has to get a permit to replace their windows.
Right.
Evanston, you have to get a permit to do anything. So that is a little bit of an issue there. So the question is, do we want to apply this to smaller buildings? And do we want to just apply it to all buildings, or do you want to apply it to all buildings and renovation of buildings? So those are the kind of A, B, or C.
Technical question, the Madison code is being challenged and it went to appeals, right? I will say right off, I'm not interested in passing anything that's in court right now, but I would come back to it later. So that could be an option, but I'm just gonna say that. Here, go around.
Could we maybe let Chuck speak first since he's okay. Procedure.
Yes, you are the advocate and the expert in the room.
I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to pretend to be someone who can really speak to the legal issue there. But my understanding is that the will is contesting that not so much on the manner in which you would mitigate the threat or even the applicability of it, but in the fact about whether a community can actually create something like this that is functioning like a building code rather than a zoning ordinance. That was the nature of the guts of their complaint. And that was
Madison's is a building code.
well, that's what they're alleging. That's what was struck
that's the
down in the
challenge.
first ruling.
Okay,
So
appreciate it. All right.
When a resident wants to replace their windows, they have to go before the design review board. Do businesses need to do that as well?
Residents don't. They go to design review board if they're changing the opening, but a window replacement they don't, and commercial don't as well. So as long as you're not making it bigger or making it smaller, no properties. The window, and then they primarily look at the infill to make sure the infill matches and that the window sills and everything look consistent. So yeah, the design review board does review a lot of window proportion changes, but not,
And new openings.
if you cut a new opening
Yeah,
as
new
well, they make
openings
sure
or
that,
ceiling
you
up the
know,
window.
kind of
I
meets the
think
aesthetic.
lowering that threshold to 5,000 square feet buildings makes perfect sense. Otherwise, if it's never going to be applied to most projects, why even have it? And I see that it would only be applicable if a business was going to replace all of their windows. So not if there was a big windstorm and that trash can went through the window of home again, that they'd have to replace a window. That we're not talking about that. Like, okay, you had misfortune and now you're going to have to put in frittered glass.
So those are three separate items
That we could think about.
to think about, because again, if we are talking about applying it to replacing all windows, we would have to change the procedures to say that if somebody would, and I don't think you want to do that.
Bart would need an assistant to go around to manage all that.
Commercial storefront windows would be somewhat manageable just because they are somewhat rare and you can see them, obviously, you know, we're not looking at the back of someone's house or anything, so it would be difficult to maybe perhaps make that known, but it is something that we would see. The problem you'd have is if you see it too late, they've already ordered the windows, and then
Yeah,
you're in this pickle of, you know, well, we already purchased it, and then they're gonna get a variance and et cetera, so it would be something that we would really need to talk with the bid and property owners to make sure that they're very clear if that was to be the case. It's not that we can't do it because places have done it, obviously. It's just that's not something that we have historically done. On new buildings, it's very easy because they're coming to you with the window details. I voiced some hesitation in terms of expectations and how we can communicate if we were to go to something like C. I also think that it's something that the Conservation Committee and Village in general could advocate to property owners as opposed to requiring it. But if there's a campaign that, you know, we could have on our website or mail out to people and have people voluntarily do it, I think it'd be great. I think there's interim measures besides replacing your glass that I think other places would like to tout, right? Like we have a bird-friendly storefront. I think that's something that the community, because in the work group, we discussed that this really is something the community we think agrees with. It's a matter of how can we best make it happen. And I think in terms of enforceability, lowering the threshold, completely doable. The window replacements is very difficult, but I think a campaign to help other solutions would also be a good thing that a conservation committee or board or bid or someone could work on to not kind of, you know, give up on that attempt, but maybe just not regulate it. So it's kind of my discussion or internal thoughts on that. Lowering it to 5,000 square feet, I would have no issues with for what it's worth, because that's just the number that we easily can, you know, manage when the permit comes in.
Well, I'm sure that could be publicized in the issue of Shorewood today and through the bid. And, you know, one way to look at it is if you're going to put replacement windows in, you're probably going to get a federal energy credit on your taxes because you're going to be more energy efficient, and that might offset the cost that you'd incur by putting in this kind of bird-friendly window. And we are a bird city, USA, so. And on a major migratory road, so
Okay, so support for
support definitely.
trustee Cujo?
Which one are you supporting?
That's what I'm asking.
Lower the threshold. Yeah, I think remove the threshold will be maybe a little onerous for those small, you know, individual shops. And C.
A and C.
I would do A, C, I wouldn't have it be all. I would do like 50% of those windows, because I think what'll end up happening is a developer will replace every window but one and then not do it. And not be outside the code.
What about just storefronts? As Bart suggested.
It's too many questions. No. I mean, I'm just trying to find like the appropriate happy medium here.
You know, especially on those corner buildings where you've got the facade material needs to turn the corners, you can have glass on both sides. You know, a bird might think,
That's the next slide.
oh.
Josh, where are you at?
Where am I at? I'm still a little concerned about costs here for new developments. I'm foot threshold, but I don't know if windows are expensive. Like maybe it's something that gets dropping the. Yeah, well, it's the hard
You
way.
don't have to
when it
buy
comes to my house.
special windows, you just put a decal on it.
Just a decal. I thought.
Decal passes the regulation.
Yeah, so
Okay.
the
Little
surface
dots, you know,
visual
little
markers
birds
is
flying,
pretty-
that's what I'm
pretty
on.
flexible.
Yeah. Chuck told us about that.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be a retail use for the 20.
I'm gonna
Right.
start
20
business,
feet.
right?
They could sell
You have a
tickets.
contractor in the
There
back.
you go.
Anyway, sorry
Yeah.
about that. I got a little silly.
So it's, I don't think it's a cost concern. for
Because the estimates
development.
we saw from your research was like in the $50,000 range in the Audubon, 50 to
If you
80,000.
buy the special window.
Okay, well, that was a big number and it's not.
Yeah, fair
But
enough.
if you cut out the special
But
design,
if you put
it's,
the decals, you know, like a bus strip, it's not the
Yeah, the
technology.
school
but you grab a
children.
bus.
You
with
still
a-
get like, this is where I'm like, yeah, so now I'm gonna have like these weird polka dots on my windows. I like birds a lot. I like this
I don't know
direction.
that you do.
They fly, they're pretty cool creatures. I'm just a little nervous about, has the technology caught up to what we're asking people to do and what the impact would be to, especially the smaller builders. They want the spaces.
So I'm hearing.
A, for right, or I'm sorry, I keep this standard, not A, B, or C. I'm on the,
Here it is.
I don't know. I mean, if I get more information, I'm happy to.
I will say, I think that technology is catching up really quickly. I mean, I think there's a lot of options out there and I think the costs are gonna come down. So,
This is where I like reevaluate it in 24 months. Like I'm fine.
Take it separately at a later date.
You have a stakeholder that's very passionate. You have a conservation committee. It seems like there might be ways to better understand that. That's where I'm at right now. Again, I'm not as deep in this as other people.
Well,
If I could finish going
Sure.
around and then. I am not gonna, yeah, I would like to take it separately at a later date, because the court activity.
is that you said that was a will lawsuit?
Classic.
They're gonna lose it.
It's,
Yeah, that's fine.
something about lawsuits and villages, you know.
That's what Will does.
Did you have an opinion, Bart?
I have no problem lowering it to 5,000. Like I said, from an enforcement standpoint, that doesn't bother me. In our conversations, I did hear the working group discuss how this really does match the ethos of the community, and cost did not come in as a major factor in terms of there being other options and design catching up to us. We did discuss it. We don't have a lot of firm numbers. We reached out to Madison to provide additional perspective, which made me more comfortable with including it within the code. I totally understand the whole idea of I don't want this whole code litigated either, but in terms of the question at hand here, I would be fine with A. I think C is a great idea, but I think that's more of an educational campaign. I don't think that's a regulation. So if you're looking from my perspective, that's where I'm kind of sitting at it right now.
Yeah, in the future, once lawsuits are not on the table, then, once it's not being litigated, I would support it.
are you saying to remove it from the code though, or leave it as it is? But to-
Oh, I'd say I would prefer that we leave it out for now and that we come back to it.
I'm in favor of A. My thought initially during the working group and my question was around cost, and I know I appreciated Chuck, all the work that he did to put together some cost estimates. And I think that the decals satisfy some of that cost concern. So I'm in favor of A.
I'm in favor of A.
Okay, we'll let the village board.
We have a D where we apply it to just new construction. And maybe renovations that include replacement of like at least 50% of the windows. You know, not all to get around that, you know, one window.
That was my idea.
I know.
So let's go around and see if anybody's in support of D.
It was my idea. I should, yes, I still support my.
right. You support Eric's idea?
Restate your idea one more time.
Just in general, you vote no. I know you don't. It was a combination of A, the first portion of C, and then 50% of all replacement windows. So you wouldn't have a developer replace
Sure. All the ones.
99% and then leave one. That we're okay.
I mean, if you're gonna do it, that seems like a something to consider.
And the person who redid this high-X building put on the windows and we looked at this.
All right.
Okay. So
The D, I mean, the
Recorded, Leslie,
applicability.
you can always come back to it.
So D is 50,000 square foot,
No,
5,000, or 5,000, that's what I meant. 50% of window replacement
Or new construction.
or new construction.
is that 50% of the applicable windows?
Yes.
So
Because if they're 50 square feet or less, like
But
the
yeah, they
upper
would apply.
story.
Right.
Mhm, okay.
Yeah.
So do you agree with, either of you agree with that, or do you want to leave the windows as out, the replacement windows? Because we have
I'm
kind of a
fine.
mixed bag here.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Fine with D?
Yeah.
Fine with
Yeah.
D.
I support Eric's idea.
Okay.
Twice as long.
I think I, I think I do also, I'm just confused
Quite
about
technical,
the
nice and dry.
enforcement part of it. I don't like, that seems a little loose to me, and so I think by the time, could you make a note of just making it more clear about what the enforcement aspect would be when it comes to the village board?
sure. And so the next portion of our discussion is other changes that would be required. That would be a new change that would be required. We have to require permits for that type of
Okay,
instance.
so there's a remedy for that.
Right, so as we'll discuss briefly, or shortly, hopefully, the changes in here are gonna prompt changes elsewhere in the code.
Right.
If that were to be adopted, it would need to be changed elsewhere in the code as
Okay.
well to trigger that kind of permit. So,
Okay, then I support D.
Yeah.
I just don't support having any of this in the. I just won't vote for it, to be codified at this time. But I support it.
Well, the second half to this is the fly-through condition, which is the way that the current code is stated. It's any two panels of glass that are within 15 feet of each other, so at a right angle. If there's, a wall that's 15 feet, the two, panels of glass would not be. But if they're touching, or there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 up to, 14 feet, then that would create a fly-through condition. Or if they are parallel to each other or anything in between. And I think Chuck was concerned that this North Shore Bank building, which does not meet even the 5,000 square foot limit, would not trigger the sort of fly-through conditions, but it really would, because it's 3 sides of glass. So it would trigger it. So he was suggesting that we increase the proximity of those two panels to 30 feet, which would be, what you see here. That is actually about 30 feet from the front to the back of the bank building. My opinion, I don't know. My opinion is that if you didn't have the glass on the end, it wouldn't look like that. Like if
It would create a
the
fly-through condition.
side street was solid, that you wouldn't see, like right now we look at that and it looks like it's completely open all the way through. But I think if there was not light coming in from that side, it wouldn't look quite as extreme as it does right there.
If you're on a different angle.
Hmm.
On the right angle, right now you're looking at a cross, but any part of the right angle you can.
Right, you would have to be like straight at it, going flying right at it. But
What
still,
you birds see.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's like,
so.
in my house, they fly into the window. Now that there's a window out the back of the kitchen, they fly into the front window. Because they think they can go through the house, because they're birds, they don't have that kind of restriction.
They're probably farther than 15 feet apart,
And they're more than 15 feet apart, not much, my
Which
house
is-
is small, but,
which is really what I was trying to say here is that
yeah.
Bart and I can hold up pieces of glass and you could still see through it. You could get any distance, any apart from each other, and a bird would still try to fly.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so what,
So Chuck's recommendation was to change it to 30 feet. But I will say that I'm not sure there are any other codes that have that great of a distance. The
Great.
15 feet is pretty common. So increasing the proximity of the two panels to 30 feet is the consideration, which, you know, really then any building that's 30 feet, you know, deep is likely going to have this situation. And, you know, this would be actually, because of the size of it, it wouldn't apply to that particular building. If that building were bigger, then that glass would have to be treated anyway. So it's just a question of whether or not, you know, I think what we were trying to catch in this was those kind of connectors between buildings and things like that, that might not trigger it, but. So I'm not sure if it really.
whether it's 15 or 30? And then if it's 30, then we're in territory that no one else is doing. So let's go around and say 15 or 30. So 15 is what it is currently, and the request is to change it to 30. And if 30 is the will of the group and it comes to the village board, we need a legal opinion. We'll need a legal opinion about the whole thing, but
I'm still confused in this. So does this only apply to windows that are size? Like I'm just thinking
If
of,
if I'm hearing Chuck right, it's the illusion that you can go through something and it's the distance between the two panes of glass to create that like blue sky effect. Am I hearing you?
So the fly-through conditions does not have the
window size.
window size restriction.
If I have
Right?
two little windows, a corner of a building where they don't touch each other,
If they're 15 feet
but
apart.
they're within 15 feet of a triangle, right? So any corner of a building would have this requirement.
It's glass.
Well, glass up to the corner, or just a window that exists on the side of the building?
Within 15 feet of each other.
You can see
Yeah.
through each other.
So every corner of a house, right, there's a window here and a window here, within 15 feet of each other. Is that applies,
Yeah, I think that here, let's look at,
or we,
whoops. So I think the thing is,
If there's the window here and there's another
Yep.
window over here that you can see through, it would apply.
so if we increase it to 30,
30, then it just keeps
it's
going
gonna
on
keep.
going.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably walls.
in between.
But that's exactly what the fly-through condition is.
Mhm.
So you have a lot of like bird corpses in your yard, or they just get stunned and then
I haven't had
shake it off.
I've been counting the cat stairs for a long time, so.
But what you're describing could be remedied by closing your blinds.
Yeah, and we put screens on and only bounce off.
Oh, so put screens on your window.
Well, we-
And to
Back
be
to
clear,
school.
this is not, we're not describing residential properties.
Right.
It's only commercial.
Commercial, yeah.
so.
So it's not panes of glass touching, it's the fly-through on a commercial building.
And again, the remedy.
So this wouldn't apply to a residential 4-story or 2-story or 3-story.
No,
In the commercial
no.
district.
All the section is only those
In the commercial
colored
district.
blotches along Capital and Oakland Avenue, commercial district.
Yeah, on all those
Right,
4-story
but those could be
buildings.
multi-family. It could be multi-family.
Multi-family. So it does apply to residential.
Just
In
not
the
houses.
commercial.
Yeah.
And I will say that the applicability and that trigger, the glass size and the fly-through conditions are really common pieces in
Of
codes
codes.
across the country that have been in place for a long time.
Okay. So 15 or 30?
15.
I could go either way, so.
What is
I
that?
don't have enough.
But you say 30?
I would be in favor of what other communities have done and have no distance whatsoever. If you're asking my opinion. So I mean, I thought that 30 sounded like a way to help out 5,000 too. I thought it was a stepping stone that would propel a group. That's why.
Okay. But you're okay with 15 also?
No,
No.
no, I think it's too narrow. And I think that there's gonna be see-through glass. I will find two
Got it.
parallel. They're
Yeah,
16 and more feet apart from each other,
okay,
and they will be exempt.
okay,
And that doesn't make any sense to me.
okay. So,
I'm confused. But I'll go with whatever makes the most sense. If it's 30 feet.
okay,
I'm good with 30.
Yeah.
Bird friendly, Josh,
Yeah,
not bird okay.
I hear you. I was trying to think it through. So this would all still be subject to the new threshold applicability requirement?
yes.
And you can fix it with a sticker, right? I mean, like,
So that's why I liked in the beginning. I'm like, so my big issue is I don't want to make potential new MX1 housing more expensive. I think more people should get to live here, and making things expensive is not a good thing. But I'm now worried about this, like thinking about the scope of this. Can I be last?
Yeah, you are laughing.
Oh,
You are
rats.
last,
I'm fine with increasing it if you want, I guess, if that's gonna help the birds out. I don't want to stop it.
Opinion.
And did you give a preference or no?
Okay.
Okay. So that's all that I have in terms of questions. But if there are other sections,
Yeah, so at this time, yes.
Yeah, I had a couple of things that, well, more than a couple, that jumped out at me that I don't remember seeing in earlier drafts. So I'll try and go through them pretty quickly. And I'm just going to refer to the page numbers in the packet. The first is on 28 of our packet. We're talking about courtyards and outdoor plazas. And when the dates, the range of dates for when we have to have that outdoor seating in place. In the courtyard section, we're saying temporary seating must be in place between April 30th and September 30th at a minimum. Well, then in the next column, under outdoor plazas, we're saying March 15th and November 15th.
yeah.
So we just want to be consistent. And I think there's a couple other areas in the draft that mentioned the April to September date. I could be wrong. I think was the.
And we did change it internally, so Leslie had a recommendation of the other one. I just told about our policy in terms of outdoor. The village's policy in terms of outdoor dining and parklets was different than what she had recommended. So just to be consistent in terms of the zoning administrator's enforcement, not to have multiple different dates, I just suggested that we use the same date. So we probably didn't catch it in all the places.
Yeah, I don't care which dates they're, just that they're consistent.
Thank you.
Oops, I'm not done
That's fine.
And we're talking about setbacks above the third floor. I'm wondering why we're saying only 50% of the facade should be set back.
What percent, what page?
You know, I can quickly talk to that.
So it's now on the height pages.
Yeah, I mean, there's setbacks at the bottom of that same page. I'm not sure if it was.
That's
There.
the rear setback for the
Yeah.
R districts. It's on, well, okay, sorry, I'm looking at mine, which doesn't have the. So if you go backwards to page 26, the step back top story is bubble number 14. I think bubble number 14.
Yes, I was just curious why would not we require the entire fourth floor to be set back? Why just 50% and what would that look like?
So we talked about this in the Cornerstone building, the Collectivo Coffee doesn't have it across the whole. And I think that what we're trying to kind of get, our goal here is to get that kind of push and pull back, a little bit more character. And that sort of big, long swath of anything is what we're trying to avoid. And so allowing it to be just 50%, and they can do more than 50%. But that 50% minimum would allow for some of it to be that height and then stepping back. We have actually increased it just a little bit too from the size, but that was where that model came from. So like the corner of the building is fully the full height, but then the next part, that kind of pushing and pulling is what we're trying to get at.
Could those setbacks be used like for a terrace or some kind of outdoor space? Because if we did say we wanted it, say on each surface, I mean, that might help with neighborhood acceptance of a taller building height. If it's not going to be like right at the facade, it's going to be set back a little bit.
Yeah, so that's what we were trying, that's why we were incorporating it. Now, the ones on the rear at the R zone, those are continuous. You can't do just 50%. You have to do 100% of your, it can't go taller than 3 stories across the back. But on the front, when you have a building and the whole upper story is set back, it just doesn't, it's nicer to have some of it back and some of it not. So it was that kind of variety and pushing and pulling of the facade.
Then if I scroll forward to page 49, I think this has talked about the towers that we allow in some corners. And that the tower can be an additional story. So say you have a 4 or 5 story building, you could have another story, the tower. And I wondered if the group thought we really wanted to add that, or if we just wanted to.
So the tower footprint is limited to 20, maximum of 20 feet in any direction. And the idea of the tower is to give you access or to provide it at the corner. Again, trying to, I've worked in a lot of places where there was a kind of a maximum height and then it was just a sort of straight shot max height down the corridor. And what you really want is a little bit of that variety. And so this little bit of additional height, but in a minimal footprint.
So you don't think that would be then too overwhelming?
No,
In the footprint allowed?
no. I mean, it's even smaller than like a bay of a building.
Okay. On page 51, number 3 at the top. I think. Oh, the very top paragraph on the left. It says a basement, which is probably those, those half-story basements, may contain any use allowed within the building, including those allowed only in upper stories. And I don't remember the working group having a conversation about that, especially when I think later on it says we would allow residences, to be down in the basement. I don't remember us having a conversation about that. I don't think it's a great idea to have all uses in the basement.
So it's just a way to allow, so it's a way to allow the use of the basement in any way that you would allow the use of the ground floor. I'm sure
It's like Laverne and Shirley. You've got the basement
it's a garden
apartments,
unit.
and you've got the little
Garden unit.
windows at the top.
Benji's, in Benji's, there are places in the basement, there are businesses in the basement.
Yeah, and see, I don't mind the business use, but it's something about having a residence down there.
What's the objection?
An affordable, could be an affordable unit.
Or an apartment.
I mean, I wouldn't choose to live there, but if it's okay, and and someone wants to
If it's
rent it,
marketable,
then
right?
I say live down.
Have those in our village.
We do?
You walk to the west
Oh, yeah.
side of the building, see them.
Remember those people, was it New York, where those people drowned during the flood?
Okay. Okay.
All right,
Okay, well, that's
I met with
empty.
Kevin Schaefer at MMSD and they're working on climate change adaptability, so we'll be okay for that.
Okay.
And let's move forward with that southeast
Okay.
sewer.
On page 74, we talk about screening rooftop equipment from the abutting street. And I wondered if that should be plural streets. So say this, the building's on a corner lot. Does it have to be screened from both across the primary street as well as across from the non-primary street?
Well, this is from any street.
Okay, because then we need to make streets plural.
Well, I mean, it would be a different screen from a different street.
Yeah, that's under rooftop mechanical equipment C. It said it must be fully screened from the sidewalk across a budding street.
Is this just a typo or are you trying to?
Well, I'm just wondering, do we want it screened from both sides? So let's say we talked about the Stoll building, I have no idea what to put on the roof. But we want it screened from both the south side
Okay,
of Capitol.
yeah,
as well as the
okay.
East side of Stoll.
Yeah, I think that's the intent. It's just, I'll just make it any street.
Okay. On page 99. It said that buildings and garages were not allowed in the R districts. That was an we had accessory use and structure table at the bottom, where we have the R districts included. Or that doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm sorry, what section?
That table at the bottom of page 99 is accessory use and structure table.
Mhm.
And then we've got the various districts, commercial and mixed use residential and public. And one of the lines is for outbuildings and garages.
Oh,
And it's
good catch.
prohibited in residential.
Yeah.
That is a good catch. We've discussed other regulations that I think need to
Yeah.
be incorporated as well with respect to residential garages. So
Carrying forward from the current code.
That's a
into
good
this.
catch.
Yes, that's a great catch.
But you hate cars so much. You can't compare them everywhere now.
Yeah.
So
Garage is gone.
just to note, one of
Trying to
the
make it end.
other
Good grief.
one of the other issues in the generally applicable regulations will be the maximum height of 15 feet and 10% that you have in your current code for our district garages and accessory structures. So that will be part of that as a revision, because what we're doing is, and actually part has a presentation to clean up the existing code because we're moving things around, and that's one of the items that was just
Oh,
sort
yeah,
of
we haven't
hanging.
even gotten to that yet.
it is hopefully very brief. So I'm fine taking these comments first.
On page 102, under outdoor dining. Well, actually, outdoor dining comes later. This is a continuation of home occupations. And at the end of that 11 or L, there shall be no activity connected with the home occupation between the hours of 10 PM and 7 AM. And we discussed that in the working group and thought that that was impractical.
We discussed it, but also noted that it's not a commercial code. It's a residential code, and home occupations are the plan commission's next initiative on the to-do list. So you are correct, it was discussed, and I think there was consensus that it needed to be changed, but it wasn't part of this project.
I was just joking about complaining my wife working late. Like, it was not serious.
Yeah, I mean, if you're making a wedding cake and they need it to, you're up till 2 in the morning, whatever you're doing.
But you are correct, it was discussed. I just want to clarify that it was not part of the project. So that's why it hasn't changed in here.
Okay, and then under prohibited home occupations, right in the list below that, we've got nursery schools. Is that different than like home daycares?
So state statute requires that you allow small daycares in your home of no
Yeah.
more than 8 children.
Okay,
So this would be for nurseries larger than 8 children.
okay. And you just need to spell it out. All right.
Definition of nurseries.
There's 2 more.
What page?
123, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Oh, this was, of course, you'll understand why this caught my eye under just the introduction to zoning, where we talked about intent and to avoid undue population concentration, lessen congestion, and promote the safety and efficiency of the streets. Again, I bring you 3 stories, so again, we don't want.
Taken, point taken.
Got it, okay. And the last thing was on page 138, under patios. which of course the plan commission started, I don't know how many meetings then.
Their number.
And with, let's see. So patios shall not be located in the side setback or rear setback of a lot, with the exception of on-grade patios in the R5 and R6 residence districts. We actually changed the code to allow on-grade patios in the rear and side setbacks, except we said you couldn't build a structure over it. So you could have a patio, but not like an arbor over it.
This is the current code though.
Right, and the plan commission changed this a couple of years ago.
This is the current code is what I'm saying. So I don't know what you're referring to, but this is,
I think this is saying with the exception of R5 and R6. So I think it's saying in those two districts, you can have them up to the setback.
Yeah, we didn't restrict it to just those two residential codes, so.
We have to go back and look at the minutes.
Yeah.
we can verify, but this, yes, this is taken from what is published online.
Yeah, I mean, I have like 2 bins full of paper in my closet with stuff, but I don't.
I'm gonna grab my cord because I think I need it.
We did a lot of that.
We'll have to make a note to,
And that's it.
well done. Anyone else? All right, then we will take, why don't we take a break if our stretch break while we'll start seeing his cord because he has the next presentation.
Okay.
Oh, my.
Wow.
You guys have a big bottle you got there for you.
Listen, buddy, it's almost empty. I'm hydrating.
Then you might want to go now.
One should not do
Oh, bored last night.
You signed up for it, man. You got no sympathy for
I
me.
know.
You worked actually hard to get people to give you that privilege.
It's all fun and games.
So you win.
It's not reflective.
No, I know it is. I'm so glad you're doing it. Thank you. Thank you for your service.
You're next.
Just to call it down the doors there.
It's a financial box. What do I have in place for you?
What a
Arthur announced yesterday.
You know, it's a good meeting. in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, no.
Now,
Did I hope I didn't lose the Zoom.
Nope, it's on.
I was looking for real estate the other day.
It looks weird in my screen, but it's still on.
I think it's just not there.
oh yeah,
It didn't surprise me.
no.
I think they're like right next to the construction. site.
So they bought the house not knowing that was happening.
What are you kidding?
So now they're leaving. Great neighbor.
Are we ready for me? Sorry.
I just have to hit the middle button on there, so it starts again, right in the middle. It should start.
Ready?
Yeah, the pause.
Oh, I think it's still going.
Well.
Here.
Here. It's going. All right.
Recorded as we speak.
Yeah. Thought it paused.
So the next
Oh, wow.
section of what we're contemplating here is other code updates. So these are also included in your packet, so if we get a chance to review them, but I'll just run through them topically real briefly. So we would also need to change 225.12 of the design review board standards to relocate that to the zoning chapter. Once again, it's in the packet and it's in the new code. It's just saying that we have to also clean that up when we're moving it over. Outdoor dining, similarly, it's currently in the food section, which honestly makes no sense. And the health department was unaware that it was in there as a regulation. So we would be relocating that to the accessory use table of the zoning chapter as a conditional use. So carrying it over as a conditional use, but putting it in the zoning chapter, removing it from the food chapter where it makes no sense. We kind of discussed this briefly, but the current code does not allow sleeping in any basement, commercial or residential. Based on the proposal, we would be updating that section to say sleeping in basements is still prohibited in the R districts. Should the board wish to change that at a future date or plan commission, that could be discussed. But in terms of making this compatible with the current code, if that sleeping in the basement section was maintained in the commercial zoning update, this would also need to be changed. Those steps are curriculum, let me tell you. Outdoor sales and display is currently in 43714 with approval of the village manager. The village manager has no interest in maintaining that authority, and we would relocate it to the zoning chapter as an accessory use or a special privilege. Special privilege to the board if it's on public right of way, as with other special privileges. Accessory use limited to limited to yard standards in the accessory use portion of the use chapter. So once again, it's moving it over, changing the authority to either permitted as a right in a location or village board if on the right of way. Commercial dumpster screening is also currently required in section 455 2D. We're just going to update that reference to include shall meet the standards located in the zoning chapter. So once again, just make it congruent with what we are recommending. Those are the other sections that I have identified. I don't think there's other ones, but we will continue to look to make sure that we're not missing anything. The next one would be other code updates within the zoning chapter. And so as you can imagine, we have added and modified a few definitions along the way. And because this is a commercial update, we don't want our definitions to impact residential or public definitions. So we're proposing to have a general section of definitions, and then one section related to residential and public, one related to commercial, just to keep things clean. Similarly, this was discussed at the Plan Commission and the Village Board as an element to update within this code project. Open space currently in 535-9G, we would clarify that this relates to the R districts. We would maintain that 30% requirement. Any other open space or green space requirements in the commercial zoning chapter has been identified within the site standards section, correct? Yes. So this would look to make that clarification that 30% is maintained for the R districts only. In commercial districts, you would look at the site standards to identify how much space needs to be reserved for landscaping or things of that nature. So that was a discussion point. Just want to make sure that you're clear on that would need to be changed as well. Residential and public use districts, they're currently all in their own individual chapters, just moving those into Article 5. Let's discuss that. So that shouldn't be news to anyone. That's pretty straightforward. And then lastly, off-street parking requirements, which we did not want to discuss as part of this project. Unfortunately, that section relates to B4 districts and things of that nature. So we had to clean up some definitions, word usages, and references. No substantial changes to any of that stuff. The one change would be that we're going to clarify the requirements for clinics. Currently, the off-street parking requirements are subject to conditional use permit. They're no longer going to be a conditional use. And so we're just clarifying that the general recommendation of 1 or 4 spaces per doctor would be the regulation, not the general guidance, because the conditional use is not coming to the Plan Commission anymore. So this would just be clarifying that instead of giving that as a discretionary review of the Plan Commission, we're just saying it's a regulation. So those are what we've identified in terms of other zoning or other code sections. If we find other ones, we will definitely keep you posted on that. The code is a large animal, and so hopefully nothing else is hidden in there, but that's where we're coming in from this perspective. One question.
Yeah, what were you just saying about conditional use permits don't come to the Plan Commission anymore, or is it just for the parking?
For clinics, so clinics are currently conditional use, they would not be, but the regulations for parking said that it was to be reviewed as part of that. Well, if it's no longer part of that, we can't review it. So we're just making it the regulation instead of the guidance. So that, like I said, that's my brief overview of the other changes.
So any questions? about the changes? All in support?
Yeah, they're pretty much housekeeping that just needed to take place as a result of the larger update.
About the zoning map in the packet, there were these little bubbles with questions. Did those get resolved? I don't know, I had a spark report, it was like 179.
Oh, that's the
It's an old-
community workshop.
Yeah, this was, I think it's on page 179.
Yeah, yours doesn't have that. Are you sure that's?
279.
Oh, yeah, I just printed it out this morning.
Did you put it from the packet or from
From
a
the
previous?
I'm in the packet right now, it doesn't have.
Yeah, I was gonna say mine doesn't, so.
You have a gremlin.
Maybe it was I hit the previous agenda or something.
All right, resolved. Well, thank you. We can close out item 3.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Well done. Item 4, discussion of possible updates to the Village of Shorewood Comprehensive Plan 2040 in conjunction with the commercial zoning update. So this was brought to us previously. It did. We took action that it was part of the open house and was used.
Correct.
You guys know what I'm saying. So it's coming back to us.
Yeah, so you had recommended to include it within the public participation plan for the general project. The board approved that as well. We did have a board at the public open house that discussed the reason for the change. I received no counterpoints to the requirement, the reason for it. So just briefly, the commercial zoning update is recommending a more nuanced zoning scheme with respect to ground floor commercial uses than is recommended in our land use chapter. And so this is the land use chapter. All that purple would have required ground floor commercial use throughout the district. We have a lot of pockets of blue buildings, as we're calling them, in residential that don't have that requirement. And so this is what we're proposing, a more checkered, nuanced nodal pattern. With that, however, the narrative description of these land use sections very specifically requires ground floor non-residential development. It is staff's recommendation that we simply strike that from the comprehensive plan. It's too specific, quite honestly, and this allows the zoning to be more flexibly administered moving forward if there's changes or not changes. So I just think in terms of the specificity of that, I think it's unfortunate that we didn't catch that requirement at the time. So it'd be staff's recommendation to remove it from the central core mixed use, the Main Street mixed use, and the suburban mixed use. There's also a sentence in the residential mixed use that says it's encouraged but not required. For consistency, I would remove it from all 4 sections. So once again, that is staff recommendation. It provides the greatest flexibility for zoning considerations. There could be an alternate solution, but would simply encourage it rather than require it. At that point, it's really unnecessary anyways, but I just think for being clean, I would recommend removing it from all 4. But once again, there is an alternate to encourage it, which essentially would allow the mix of land uses. So I'm just looking for some discussion and direction on which of those options you'd like us to pursue. The Plan Commission would be expected to recommend that version at your next meeting on January 24th. With village board consideration concurrent with the code, which we're currently projecting to be February of 2023.
Right, so the proposed will be the land use map and then this staff recommendation.
Yeah, the land use map wouldn't be changing, just these narrative descriptions where we remove these sentences from the descriptions.
Got it. So questions, discussion, support, no support.
So those labels, mixed use Main Street, we would keep those labels.
Correct. Yep.
Even though they're not really applicable.
The rest of the narrative matches what the commercial zoning update is recommending. It's just that one sentence is specifically counter to it. So there's no issue with keeping the current map and the other narrative sections. It's just that regulation that we'd like to
And then the
address.
zoning just takes like a deeper dive into those.
Correct. Yes, that's the interplay of the land use map and the zoning is that they should be consistent, but they're not the same. They shouldn't be counter to each other. Great.
Okay.
Okay, I take that as a recommendation to support
Yes.
staff, so we'll
Yep.
prepare a
We are
update to remove it.
supporting staff. Get that in a minute. Unanimous support of staff. All
Very much appreciated. Thank you. That is the end of that item.
right. All right, closing out item 4, item 5, future agenda items. Yeah.
There's nothing on the table in terms of future meetings with respect to this project. I did discuss with Leslie I don't think there's a need to have a special meeting to discuss the recommendation, so we would schedule the recommendation of this project for the January 24th meeting. Based on consultation with the village manager and village president in terms of when it can be placed onto an agenda in February for approval, we would publish the public hearing notice accordingly. So in terms of next steps, we think that this is plenty of time for us to get the draft revised for recommendation January 24th, which would then presumably, if recommended, lead into a February consideration by the village board to be scheduled based on availability of meetings.
Okay, and so there will not be a hearing at the plan commission. It will be simply consideration
Or recommendation of
Correct. Yep.
updated code to the village board. All right, so otherwise,
No applications that we're anticipating?
I feel like we have one that for resale that may or may not be in the works, but she hasn't responded back to me. A potential applicant for channel changers, but I don't know how far along she is on that process, but nothing on file.
There was that one email in our packet from, I think, the property owner on Oakland and Capitol, but he referenced a couple projects. Are those kind of like in the future dump, like?
Yes, nothing that I am aware of. I know he's been discussing potential reuses of that parking lot, but
all right, great. That leaves, I will say, in anticipation, if there are any additional comments or if you're planning to propose anything different before the January 24th with that final draft, please submit it in writing so that we're as prepared as possible to take action that evening.
And the plan can go forward to the village board, even though it's not a unanimous vote.
Correct. Yeah. All right, motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All right, motion to adjourn by Barbara Kelly Miller, second by Therese Klein. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned at 8:52. Thank you. Have a safe drive back.